Massy Arts would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Tonight, we receive writers Leah Ranada and Andy Zuliani for a double launch of their debut novels, The Sinistar Salon and Last Tide. The authors will read passages from their books and answer questions about their literary process. Questions from the audience will also be accepted, and you can send us your questions through our Zoom room. Leah Ranada is launching her debut novel, The Sinistar Salon, published in 2021 by New West Press. Ranada was born in the Philippines and moved to Canada in 2006 after graduating from the University of Santo Tomas in Manila.
Sorry, Raphael, I think you're just supposed to pass it to me, and then I'm going to do the rest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought I was going to do...
No, but that way I can introduce the authors and do a little prep stuff. Sorry. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Claire Kelly. I'm with New West Press. I'm going to let Raphael tell you how to get the books, though, and then I'll be hopping back in. We can't hear you, Raphael. You're muted.
Am I muted? Massy Books and Massy Arts are partners of this event, and Massy Arts is a community hub dedicated to supporting the practices of Indigenous and underrepresented artists. We seek to galvanize community spirit by providing a space where readers, writers, and artists can come together. Massy Books is an Indigenous-owned and operated bookstore that believes books have a kind of portable magic that accelerates curiosity, sparks conversation, makes connections, and incites action. We believe in the power of books to enrich lives and build community, and we thank everyone present at this event, and kindly remember our viewers that the books are available to purchase at our online store, massybooks.com. Thank you, Claire.
Now it's my turn to remember to unmute myself. I nearly started going too. I'm Claire Kelly. I'm the marketing and production coordinator, which is always a mouthful. It just means I've been lucky enough to be spending a lot of time with these books. We're here on Zoom tonight to celebrate the launch of Leah Ranada, the Sinistar Salon, and Andy Zuliani's Last Tide. The reading's being recorded, but feel free to leave your cameras on if you want to, so that the readers aren't reading into the void. But please, of course, leave your microphones off. All that background noise can actually build to quite a cacophony. After the two authors read, we'll be having a Q&A. If you move your mouse around, you'll be able to find a thing that says chat, and that's where you'll put your questions for later, and I'll read the questions aloud. The reason I read them aloud is because this will be up on Zoom. Hi, Zoom people in the future. And your chat box won't travel to YouTube. I'm coming to you from Alberta, and we have readers from BC. That's why it's dark here, and I'm sleepier than I should be for a grown-up. I just want to follow up on Raphael's land acknowledgement, though. Just because I think it's important to have something concrete to do outside of just listening to the land that we are settlers on, most of us, if not all of us. One way you can help is by donating to the Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Center Society. I go to this one when I have Vancouver-based writers or writers writing about Vancouver, and that's the case here. And it's a Vancouver nonprofit organization. The link is in the chat, and if you're able to help out, please do. So up first tonight is Leah Ranada. Leah Ranada was born in the Philippines and moved to Canada in 2006, shortly after graduating from the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. She attended the Writers' Studio at Simon Fraser University in 2013. Her short stories have appeared in various literary journals. Leah has brought her administrative and editorial skills, which was both very helpful while putting a book together, I will say, to legal settlement services and academic workplaces. She lives in New Westminster and blogs at leahranada.com. That'll be in the chat box later as well, that link. So let's all give Leah a round of silent Zoom applause.
Thank you, Claire and Raphael. You know, it's so nice when you have two people fighting to host you. Yeah, thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I'd like to thank everybody at New West Press and Massy Books for putting this event together. Thank you so much to Anne Nothoff and everybody at New West Press for helping me with this book. Anne is incredibly insightful in getting the story to be better. I really like this story, but at the same time, it's always helpful when you have people helping you make it better, and you know, just to turn a story into a book. And thank you everyone who is here. It's such a special evening. It's my first book, and I'm launching it, and it's really wonderful to see so many friendly faces and a lot of familiar ones. So the book is called The Sinistar Salon. I'll talk a little bit about what it's about. Sophia is the protagonist. She is a hair salon owner who's based in Vancouver, but she's also originally from the Philippines. And her promising life here in Canada is upended when her friend from back home, she's called Auntie Rosie because she's an older woman. Auntie Rosie reaches out asking for financial help. Auntie Rosie is the owner of the Sinistar Salon in Manila, and she's lost all her clients because she accidentally hurt a woman in the middle of a haircut. And now she's asking Sophia for financial help. So our protagonist finds herself conflicted between trying to help the business that nurtured her passion and also her friend, and at the same time pointing out to her friend that it's her failings that's leading the salon to its downfall. So I'm reading two brief passages. The first one takes place in Sophia's childhood. Just want to double check that you can hear me, right? Yeah? Great. Okay. Beauty salons were for women, not little girls. Sophia had believed this until she was brought to Sinistar when she was 9 years old. She would realize later that her mother had simply devised a lie, so she could go to the hair salon without a child in tow. But Sophia would never see herself as a little girl again. They had been visiting Auntie Mila, who had told them about the newest beautician in her neighborhood. The old woman, she's very skillful. It's time for your daughter to get a real haircut, no? You can keep cutting her hair yourself. Plastered on Sinistar's window were pictures of women sporting lush, wild-looking hairstyles that reminded Sophia of poodles. When they stepped inside, a harsh odor stung her nostrils, making her think of a witch's potion. She counted 3 mirrors, framing the reflections of 3 ladies wearing dark capes, sitting on cushioned chairs. More women were seated against the back wall. The frail yet regal old woman fussing over the ladies on the chair turned out to be the owner. Aling Helen wore a dark green blouse with puffy sleeves and a knee-length pleated black skirt. A strand of white pearls peered from her collar. Sophia thought then that if dolls grew old, they would look like Aling Helen. The title, Aling, seemed wrong for her. It was the same one her mother used for women in the market, whose hands were stinky from handling raw meat and fish, fruits and vegetables that still smelled of earth. Aling Helen was more like a madame. Do we need an appointment? Her mother asked, observing the women sitting in the salon. There's 2 of us. I recommend that, but I work quick, so I usually have time for walk-ins. Aling Helen's throaty voice was somehow audible over the whirring of the hairdryer. My assistant just stepped out, but she should be back soon. Sophia and her mother leafed through magazines while they waited for their turns. The models on the glossy pages had eyelids like rainbow rays. They stared at Sophia with dramatic gazes. Some women had their hair piled up like a queen's, or swept airily across their foreheads. Others had wavy tresses cascading like water past their shoulders. She swung her legs, impatient for her turn to be pretty. More women arrived, whom Aling Helen invited to sit down as she glanced worriedly at the window. When her mother's turn came, she said to Aling Helen, "My hair is limp and dry. I don't have much time to style it in the mornings, only for putting on rollers." "Big ones?" Aling Helen put a cape on her mother. "They take the least time." When Aling Helen finished, her mother stood up with her hair in short, billowy waves that made her look like our TV reporter. Sophia felt like she was getting a better mom. It was finally her turn. The chair was too high. One of her slippers fell to the floor, but she was too scared to ask Aling Helen to pick it up and slip it onto her dangling foot. Maybe her mother had been right about beauty salons not being for girls. "I'm thinking of the apple cut for her," she heard her mother say, and Sophia wondered what kind of transformation she was about to go through. She looked up at the mirror and arranged her face into a strong, grown-up expression she had seen in the magazines: hard gaze and small lips. Chimes jingled, and a woman several years younger than Aling Helen appeared at the door. She winked at Sophia in the mirror. She was short and plump, and her dark skin glowed in the afternoon sun, along with the ringlets that framed her smile. The house dress she wore was so sheer that sunlight streamed through, showing the outline of a slit around her thighs. "Rosie, finally! Where have you been?" Aling Helen was suddenly stern. "Just around," the younger woman chirped and turned to the waiting clients. "Okay, who's next?" Aling Helen shook her head. "You can't keep leaving the salon during business hours." Sophia stared at her lone slipper on the floor. She felt bad for this friendly woman being scolded in front of everyone. The neighborhood felt different when they stepped out, as if it had transformed into a lesser place while they had been at Sinistar. Shirtless men and noisy women, milling outside the stores and plywood patch dwellings, eyed Sophia and her mother as they waited for a tricycle that would take them home. Her time on Aling Helen's chair had seemed too quick. Sophia kept replaying the experience in her mind: sprayed water that tickled her nape, the pleasant tugging at her scalp as Aling Helen lifted sections of her hair, the steamy breeze from the hair dryer. When her cape came off, Sophia's eyes looked rounder and her cheeks popped out. The bangs on her forehead provided a shield for her secrets. Her mother clapped her hands at this new look as Sophia turned her head, searching for all other grown-up parts of herself that had finally come to light. "Madame's haircut is so pretty," someone called out. Her mother beamed, tightening her hold on Sophia's hand. A group of children nearby looked at them, their faces smeared with dirt and sweat. From the window of a sari-sari store, Aling Soledad peered out curiously between the hanging bags of prawn crackers and chocolate cookies. "She's a call girl after store hours," her Auntie Mila had said of Aling Soledad. Sophia imagined Aling Soledad calling out to people in the streets. She didn't understand what her mother and Auntie Mila found so interesting about that. She had always liked her bright, doll-like face and her wavy hair that flowed to her waist. But now, Aling Soledad was following her mother with admiring eyes. "I think we found our favorite stylist." Her mother had patted her waves to show off to her father that evening. She winked at Sophia. "Sophie and I will be going back there." Okay, so that's the childhood, and I'm moving on to another passage. So this scene happens in the present time. Sophia is now a grown-up living in Canada, and she is on a Skype call with her friend, whose name is Erwin. Erwin is also a childhood friend from Manila, and he's familiar with Auntie Rosie's situation and Sinistar. So they are in a Skype conversation, and Erwin is in an internet shop, or I don't know how you call it here in Canada, but we call it internet cafe in Manila. So, could you help her? Erwin looked meek and nervous on her laptop screen. Look, she's not here yet. If you're still mad at her, I can say you're offline. Did she want to hide from Auntie Rosie? Sophia felt bad for even considering this option. Years ago, it was Auntie Rosie who stood behind her, giving Sophia a voice at the time when it felt impossible to use her own. How could she let this woman go hungry? Hey, Auntie Rosie just walked in, Erwin said. Let me talk to her. Erwin waved at someone not visible from her screen. She's been drinking last night, so she's going to be weepy. Diyos ko, I could smell her, he managed to whisper before standing up to offer his plastic chair to Auntie Rosie. She was older and more frail. Sophia noticed the bulging crescents beneath the weathered eyes, which deepened into pools as Auntie Rosie started to cry. Sophie, darling, I thought I'll never see you again, she whimpered. How are you? Auntie, please don't cry. Auntie Rosie wiped her tears with her forearm. My head hurts so bad, but I really wanted to see you. Even when we stopped talking, I thought about you every day. She was steadying her voice, straightening her face. Failing at both, she burst into another round of sobs. I'm sorry that this has to happen for us to talk again. A dash of unease shot through Sophia as she remembered the reason they had stopped speaking. How are you? Tell me how you've been. Erwin told me you're marrying a Canadian. Sophia nodded. Yes, Auntie, we've been together for more than 2 years. Is he a good man? Because if not, he'll get this. Auntie Rosie held up a bony fist. He's a very kind man, Sophia smiled. It felt good to glimpse Auntie Rosie's feistiness after all those years. How are you doing? I'm getting by with Erwin's help. Yesterday, he brought me sardines with rice. She patted Erwin, who had pulled another chair beside her. Are you hungry? He asked. I ate a little at home, Auntie Rosie said before turning to Sophia. Darling, I just need some money so I can support myself until my clients come back. Whatever you can spare will help a lot. I can manage with very little. How could she say no to this? How much do you need, Auntie? Auntie Rosie looked really embarrassed now, which made Sophia wish she had worded her question differently. Just enough for food and bills, until I can support myself again. How long would it take for her to be independent again? Sophia thought, but she stashed this question away in her mind. She still needed to see Adrian tonight. Auntie, I have to go somewhere, but I'll send you some money tomorrow, okay? Just to help tide you over. Ay, Sophie, darling. Auntie Rosie clasped her hands. Maraming salamat. You have a very good heart. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was I like Sophia so much. Like she does have a good heart. I was thinking a lot today about haircuts during the pandemic, because like while working on your novel, like proofreading and stuff, I realized I've been to the hairdresser less while working on a novel that takes place in 2 hair salons than I have in years. And yeah, there was something, I had a Pixie Cut one on the start. Like it's been a long time. So it's very interesting to visit a world of work that many people have stepped away from recently. So yeah, it's a really interesting, yeah, I like your book a lot. So that's all. Thank you for reading.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that.
It's such a happy night today. Like it's celebrating debut authors. As someone who is once a debut author, it makes my heart happy. So like, yeah, thanks for reading. Up next is our second reader, second book we're celebrating is Andy. Andy Zuliani is a writer and multimedia artist who lives in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. He was born in the suburbs of Vancouver and educated at Simon Fraser University and New York University. In his written and audiovisual work, he is drawn to the cultural afterlives of the 1960s, to the possibilities of ambiance, tone, and collective feeling. And those last three things you really get in his novel, like that. Yeah, I can tell those are things you think a lot about, Andy. And he's interested also in narratives of crisis, of healing, and of improvised communities of care. Again, three things that come up, the way the community on the island is organized and how it deals with stuff. So yeah, good bio, Andy. So let's all give a round of silent Zoom applause to Andy.
Hi, thank you. Of course, I want to echo Leah in thanking New S Press, my amazing editors. I'll get to the question about the island in a bit. My main editor on this project sadly is no longer with us. It's the late, great Doug Barbour, but I also had lots of help too from Claire, who had kind of like a fantastic eye for both very surface level mistakes I didn't catch, even though it was like the third or fourth reading, but also logistical stuff that I owe like the solution of my biggest plot hole to you. So thank you so much.
That's what they pay me the big bucks for.
Exactly. Yeah, so my novel, Last Tide, is set on a kind of fictional Gulf island, so kind of islands off the coast of British Columbia. It tells a story of four characters who kind of collide there. Two of the characters, Win and Anna, work for this company as kind of like a privatized version of Google Street View that essentially records street fronts, ex-vacant industrial lots, bits of forest that could be rezoned, redeveloped, and turned into condos and all that awful stuff. On the island, they meet two other characters, Lena, who is a French-born climate scientist who's moved to the island to study the big one. If you haven't heard of what the big one is, I almost don't want to tell you because it's horrifying, but essentially it's sort of the cataclysmic earthquake and tsunami that will eventually happen and more or less completely total the west coast of North America. The fourth character, Kit, is kind of an ex-athleisure mogul. He's kind of become this sort of survivalist figure. He wants to buy this sort of chunk of land on this island, build his like concrete shelter, and wait the whole thing out. Their paths cross on the island, and a series of accidents kind of throws them into different configurations. And as Claire noted, a lot of sort of tone and ambience, but especially improvised communities of care in the sense that people are made to care for each other who are strangers, who might not even necessarily agree with each other. So I'm going to read a relatively short chapter from the third section of the novel. Section 3 is called Death and Surfing. This is told from the vantage point of Lena. When Lena and Raleigh saw it, they didn't know what it was called. It was then nothing more than a structural feature, an elaboration of domestic space. But even unnamed, it still was what it was, a widow's walk. She was to learn this eventually, and then the name, suffused with decades of accumulated sorrow and loss, of women hovering in the air, scanning the horizon, waiting for the sails of the ship to bring home man or body or a folded flag. Then the name would fit. In time, she would do the belated research. Why was it, after all, that pre-war homes built close to the shore needed these parapets, these elevated balconies, lookouts built before their need? It was, of course, a fact of home building, a style, a fad. But what could one make of the flowering of these walkways from the stems of tall houses, houses destined for abandonment, for ruin, to become nearly empty, and then empty all at once. The term was both a verb and a noun, a widow's walk. It described an action and a setting, a feeling and its infrastructure. What could one make of these structures outfitted so perfectly for their scenes of love and death? This was more than an ocean view. It was an arrangement of longing and loss into which Lena would eventually fall. She had cursed them with architecture. In her arms, the coolness of the still damp neoprene, as if he were already a corpse. The sound of the pickup's engine turning over, and the dust that came from the road. The trees covering him up at the base of the hill, and then never seeing him again. Could she have seen it happen from up on her balcony? She doubted it. It was only a fantasy of extended vision. The deck pointed at the appropriate line of surf, but from that height, he would have been invisible. But she did look out when the day was coming to an end and he was not yet back, but saw nothing but the white lines of the break already going gray in the fading light. And then she called, even though she knew that his phone would be ringing to itself in the glove compartment of their truck. And then she waited in the dark until the deep, unformulated unease turned to fear. And then she began to walk. From the sides of the path, a chorus of frogs and katydids sung her along. She had done this before on other occasions when he was off somewhere in the Chevrolet, but she still had errands to run. But she had never done it in the dark. And by the time that she was in the trees, the darkness was total. She made her way slowly by the groove of the double track under her feet, down the steep course from cliffside to sea level, over the narrow bridge, and into the halogen streetlights of the main road. A passing car gave her a ride to the beach. A stranger, one of the last ones, someone from the north end of the island. He let her off at the fork where the road turned to dirt, and for a minute or two after the car had pulled away, Lena stood there, trying to will herself into believing that she was being ridiculous. Surely he had gone along with his friends, whoever was there in the water when the light had finally turned on them early this time of year, and was now at the spinnaker, shaking sand out of his hair, drinking something blonde and bitter. She would, of course, come to the end of the dirt road and find it empty, the beach as well, because everyone had called it in for the evening, had gone home. It was too dark to surf now. Of course, it was obvious. All there was to do was to make sure. Still, she was frozen in a suspended state. Until she looked, he was still there. Until she looked, he was gone. She had been given, she realized, the power to kill him, the power to change their lives, and she didn't want to exercise that power. Finally, she stepped along towards the beach, each footfall bruised and tender. There were no creatures singing anymore. When Lena came to the end of the road, she saw the truck, a dark shape against the lighter dark of the sand and sky. She ran past it and onto the beach, where there was no fires burning, no people, not even the late night kids, and no trace of him. The water was black where it hadn't been chopped up into foam and lit close to the shore by tumbling bars of phosphorescence. She called his name and heard nothing but surf. Lena returned to the truck. The keys were where he always put them, according to the surfer's worry of losing things in the deep. She took them from on top the driver's side front tire and unlocked the door. The inside of the Chevrolet smelled like salt and sweat. His wetsuit wasn't there in the back seat, where he would have left it. His wallet, glasses, and phone were still in the glove compartment. She put them on the passenger seat, turned on the headlights, and waited. When it was well past midnight, when she could put it off no longer, she called the police and reported Raleigh missing. At daylight, they combed the length of the beach, looking for anything. Lena wouldn't let herself think body, but finding a surfboard would have meant the same thing. She dialed every number in his phone and, to the ones that answered, was forced to tell a story that accreted, conversation by conversation, into a firm and fatal narrative. No one had seen him that afternoon, on the beach, in town, in any of the few places that on a small island, everyone crisscrossed many times over each day. She called each store, the gas station, the town hall, the market, and the houses of all their friends, and was told he wasn't there. And with this gradual piece by piece erasing of his presence on the map, it became more and more impossible for him to be anywhere else but in the ocean. Lena knew the currents, knew that if he fell into the water at 6 o'clock, he'd be far out in the Gulf by nightfall. The Coast Guard also knew this and sent patrol boats out. She waited as they covered all of the likely and then unlikely and then desperately unlikely stretches of the channel. She sat on the beach, feeling the sleepless night and the panic as it broke off and rounded out the edges of her world. She gave up before the Coast Guard did, returned to the empty truck, and drove back up to her home high on the ridge. The two of them had renovated it together years ago, the house that they knew was right as soon as they saw it, coming up the switchbacks in the dusty Chevrolet with the radio on and the light flooding warm through the break in the trees. A home in the sky with an unbroken view of the ocean from the wraparound deck. She shut all the blinds, turned off the lights, and lost 12 hours. Lena couldn't decide whether she wanted them to find him or not. She knew at this point Raleigh was gone, had to be gone by mathematical fact. What does one do in the situation? She didn't know the names of his parents or whether they were even still alive. She had met none of his family. She went through each drawer in their home looking for something, a photo album, an address book, but found nothing. In the middle of the night, she screwed a fresh tank into the propane lantern, took it outside to the deck that skirted the house, and, without knowing why, paced the perimeter along the rain-worn boards until the white flame guttered and the birds began to call back and forth to one another. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. I love Widow's Walks. It's such a good poetry word. It's got the sound. I will say one of your characters in the book did cure me of any survivalist leanings I might have had. Not that I have athleisure billions or millions. I don't have thousands on to build a structure on an island to live in. But oh yeah, that character. Yeah, it's a good flawed individual you threw in your book there.
Yeah, that was too. I didn't want to read one of his chapters because I dislike him so much. But he's great in his own way. Every apocalypse shelter ends up becoming basically your own prison, and his is no exception to that.
Yeah. What is it? I'm not in here with you. You're in here with me.
This is very pandemic.
Okay, so chat box, everyone. There's already some questions in there. So I'll start with a question for Leah. Rena, you will probably can't see this because it got sent to Carolina, who's sending it to me. If you want it to go faster for a process, everyone, send your question to everyone. Leah, how was it writing your first book in English when you were still getting the nuances of the language down? She also says she's very happy for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's hard to explain. I find myself explaining this a lot, that English is a second language, but it's like my 1.A language, because I grew up speaking Tagalog, but English is always in the environment if you're growing up in the Philippines, because the setup is very colonial. And yeah, I do read a lot, and yeah, so I am in this funny situation where I think Tagalog is more comfortable, but for some reason I write more in English, and it's just, there's so many explanations for that. But I do find myself tripping up. Like sometimes I'm making funny mistakes, or I'll use the wrong word, things like that. But it's really natural for me to write in English. I write my journals in English, but then during the editorial process, Claire, you probably remember that we are debating how we'll handle certain words, and I like that we stop italicizing Tagalog words, because to me, in my head, they don't really get italicized. Like, yeah, I think it's hard to explain, because it had seemed natural for me to know two languages imperfectly, and then also to sort of like, but knowing that English seems to me just the formal writing language. I know it sounds bad. It seems very colonial, but that's how it's set up. And I'm sort of hoping that, you know, at least I could make it up by writing stories about who I am and who we are.
Yeah, it's a very complicated. My mom's from England, like working class English, and I have a vocabulary, like it's not another language, but it's definitely a vocabulary that got me I got a lot of confusing looks growing up, where I'd say, "Oh, my cut's gone septic," or
Yeah.
"Oh, just toss it in the bin," and "Oh, my desk is a tip." You'll notice a theme. But yeah, it's like learning how to blend, because you blend a bit, because there's characters who use tag-along, and it does go so smoothly. Like the italics didn't make sense for sure, I thought.
Yeah, I would say though that English is so merged into Tagalog that I'd be speaking to my sister in Tagalog, and my husband, who's not Filipino, would be like, "You're using a lot of English words," you know. He could almost understand what we're talking a lot about. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's languages spread, languages share, which is a very nice thing about languages, maybe, but also can be colonial if it comes with a colonial.
Yeah.
I wanted to say anchor.
Yeah. Implications. Yeah, that's true.
Implications. That's probably a better. And I have a question for Andy. Although your book mostly takes place on an island off the coast of BC, I really do think of it as a Vancouver novel, because it seems to be concerned with problems that are very concentrated in Vancouver: alienation, gentrification, environmental impact. Why did you choose a small island to play with these ideas on? Could you have imagined setting it in Vancouver, maybe in a neighborhood or a community? Technically two questions.
That's a really excellent question, because of course, like every single thing that's happening on this island, actually, to answer Rena's question, it's sort of a fictionalized version of a kind of mix of, say, Galliano, Gabriola, Main Island, and Tofino. So it's like, in my head, I kind of fibbed a bit with the geography and put the island on the opposite side of Vancouver Island. It was important to me that it was against the ocean, with nothing, you know, between it and Japan, more or less. As far as like whether this could have worked in Vancouver, maybe part of it is because I've always felt that places like the Gulf Islands, and in general, just sort of anywhere that isn't directly in the city center of Vancouver, ends up being kind of a war zone for development. But especially because there's a very strange relationship where people kind of go there to get away from Vancouver burnout, but in doing so, bring those issues with them. I mean, especially in the past like 3 or 4 years, lots of money from like Silicon Valley has kind of bubbled up through this area, and we have a lot more an acceleration of this process that was already going way too fast and displacing, you know, thousands of people. So I was curious to look at that. I feel like the island itself is very much an important setting, if only because it shoves everyone into close contact. The sort of uncomfortable proximity that happens from these 4 characters wouldn't really play out in the same way if you could just get on a bus and go really far away, or like, you know, catch a cab or a plane somewhere else. It's sort of, Last Tide is sort of like a closed room drama in a sense. It was important to have a location that was small enough that people would have to sort of stick around and figure things out. A large part of the novel takes place as the 2 main characters, Lynn and Anna, convalesce, you know, when their cuts go septic. They have an accident and are kind of forced into the care of Lena, and they're on the island for quite some time and can't really leave. If you were in the city, you probably, you know, call an Uber or something.
Yeah, it is. I forget the word for it. In television, it's like in sitcoms and stuff, or Community did this very well, the show Community, where they'll have an episode where it all takes place in one room, because for budgetary constraints, it's very easy to. So yeah, I hadn't thought about it. It would be the ending would make it a very expensive one of those episodes. All of
Yeah.
but yeah, it's an interesting idea. There's a question here from Hiromi. I deeply appreciated that Sophie wanted to be a hairstylist, that the story offered a window into the world that has often been dismissed as women's work. It's not something I've seen in CanLit. What brought you to this choice as an area of work for Sophie?
I think, when I decided to write a novel, I wanted Sophie to have a work where she can express herself. It's important for me that she has a space that she will design. And I also wanted that work where everybody knows it, but it doesn't get that much respect. Like, one of the ideas I had was to have her become a cook, but then, chefs are a thing, right? Like, it can become prestigious and you can be proud of your kid being a chef, but a hairstylist, I think, is not the same. It's seen as, because you're making people beautiful, it might seem shallow, and maybe it's not just the Philippines. Maybe it's in a lot of places where, it's seen as people, a place, hair salons are seen where people are just sort of gossiping and talking about color and trying to try new cuts and new looks. So it seems as if it's looked down upon. It's like something super, it deals with things that are superficial. But I wanted my protagonist to do her own thing and do something that she's gonna do alone, but it's giving her a lot of joy, a lot of ways to express and help other people express themselves too. Because when we choose how we look, that's a way of self-expression too, right? And how we present ourselves. And when I was a kid, I like going to the hair salon, which is funny because I like to wear my hair long and I don't like my hair short. But when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to grow my hair. Yeah, but I don't know why. But I like, I like the hair dryer. I like it when they pull my hair. I like it when, I just, the aura in a hair salon feels so nice. It's like a living room and people are chatting and they're watching TV, and then they're so skillful, like they're holding blades and working on your hair. And I'm always so disappointed because it ends up being so fast.
Yeah, I go from long to short all the time. Possibly because my first haircut, because you were writing about the first, was when I was 2, and my hair got all tangled and it wouldn't get untangled. And so it was my first pixie cut was when I was 2. I looked like a little beatnik. It was amazing. And I keep going back to it. It's like, it opened up, even this, I'm like, it's too long now. But yeah, a good hair, I think it's a great place of drama, because a good haircut and a good haircut experience is so pleasant, and then a bad haircut experience is so awful. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
Heightened emotions.
Yeah, you think it's just hair, but it's how you will look for the next few weeks. It's like, yeah.
And I always feel the need to tell my hairdresser, oh, don't worry, I used to have a mohawk. Like, you're not going to upset me. Like, Hiromi had a comment about a conversation we were talking about earlier about languages. I wonder if certain relationships we have with one language might mean that another language offers a different kind of framework and thus becomes more creatively freeing in some ways.
It's highly possible. I think so. I find that because it's not that I can't write in Tagalog. Obviously, I know the language well. I can write in it, but I guess I find that it's my speaking language, and then English is my writing language. And English, I find that English is for flowing, it's hard to explain, but it's for flowing quiet things. And Tagalog is when I need some edge and passion. And of course you can do both with both, but that's sort of like my most basic way of explaining it. And language is really interesting to me. Like I married my husband came from the Soviet Union, and he speaks Russian, and we're always sort of like mild frustration that we don't have one language that's first to us that we can use. But at the same time, I think it's really interesting because we're hearing one another's foreign language, and it feels as if one personality is coming out when another language is being spoken. And he claims that I seem like a different person when I speak Tagalog, and I don't know what that means, but yeah, but it's true that I think language, when I'm writing in English, it just feels more calm. It has a capacity to, for me, to make intense things calm, and you know, people may not agree or not, but that's how I feel. Yeah.
And that's how it works for you. Like, and it works well. It's a great book. So, okay, I'm gonna. Oh, Hiromi said, I love that, a speaking language and a writing language. We also discovered the word I couldn't remember. Mac chimed in with bottle episode in television. It's a bottle episode where it's filmed in one room or in one location and done on the cheap. No outside shot, no extra union filming, I guess. Andy, I have a question for you. Anna and Wynn have very opposite personalities. And I've been in friendships where I'm obviously the overly chatty one, and my friends are quieter, and people mistook that for an imbalance. Was it a challenge to balance the characters without having one overpower the other in the narrative?
That's a great question. Thank you. I feel like it's tough because since the structure of the novel, every chapter has a single narrator. You're seeing those events just through the one person's perspective, and they have differing range of how much they speculate as to how other people are feeling. For kind of context, two characters, Anna and Wynn. Anna is quite sort of systematic thinker, kind of emotionally a bit withdrawn, very much the kind of person who just defaults to not communicating whenever possible, which is something I identify with. And then Wynn is a lot more sort of effusive, wants to connect, which I also feel like I identify with as well. I think we've all kind of forgotten who we were conversationally pre-pandemic, what our particular vibes were. I think you have it exactly right, where I can't imagine a relationship wherein both people have the exact same level of intensity in that regard. I think it's these sort of duos form of a person who's sort of not necessarily the sender or the receiver, but a kind of like a balance through imbalance. And I think that one of the things I'm proudest of with this novel is that, you know, despite these sort of differences, these characters who start off as kind of, you know, colleagues and friends by convenience, they both work for the same company whose headquarters are in like a crappy industrial park. So what are you going to do on your lunch break except for hang out with this person who's next to you? But they sort of, without ever, you know, making explicit their kind of similarities and their connections, find them. But I think especially through the third party, which is Lena, who is essentially their caregiver for a span of time. But I don't think there's a single bit of dialogue between Wynn and Anna in Anna's chapters, really. She doesn't really tend to report dialogue. There's one scene where she's a conversation with a kind of stranger, but her chapters are almost entirely given over to essentially surveillance. She's just taking kind of descriptions of everything that's around her. Whereas with Wynn, we get a lot more sort of speculation as to people's interiorities or what people are like or what they want. But I think they work quite well together.
There is a balance. Yeah, it makes me think about something in my past where someone said to me, oh, I thought you were always bossily choosing. I didn't realize you were remembering what the person said weeks ago and were suggesting what they wanted to do, but you were the only one verbalizing it. Yeah, it's an interesting, words aren't my friends tonight. One of those animal symbiotic relationships.
Yeah. And because silence can be a kind of holding space, and being chatty can be a kind of bludgeoning of just, you know, ear beating somebody with your kind of personal narrative. So I feel like, maybe holding space and being quiet is the best approach.
I don't know if I'm ever going to learn that. I try. It's no good. Andy, Anne has a question for you. Apocalyptic stories and films are popular now. Is this an indicator of a pervasive social despair?
Ooh, I don't know if I can be a pundit for that scale, but I mean, clearly, I think that it is harder to write a utopia in this moment than it is to write a dystopia. Um, and I feel like we are living through a series of like nested apocalypses that keep on kind of going in and in and in. So I definitely, a lot of this sort of the setting, the tone, the gloominess of Last Tide comes from what is, if not despair, kind of dissatisfaction that I've felt. But I think that I would love to read or write like a really positive utopian take on what's going to happen here, whether here means in Vancouver or in our country or in our culture or our planet. It seems like things are kind of heading towards an end. I think that the tricky thing is that there's a kind of seduction of apocalyptic thinking that people certainly fall into. I have, characters in this novel do as well, where if you're faced with the kind of total blackout, it's much easier to become a terrible person. Because if you view this sort of like closing date of your entire world as you know it, it becomes very easy to drift into sort of, well, the character Kit becomes the sort of survivalist prepper who thinks that, you know, not only does he want to survive, only really he deserves to survive. So
I will say that community of care thing in the book, and that not necessarily coming together permanently during crisis, but not thinking of yourself as just an individual during crisis, that's present in the book as well. I don't know if I could live on that island, but because I do feel like there's a different type of surveillance that would take place. But there is something about people knowing each other enough to know how to care for each other in appropriate ways. Yeah.
And I think every apocalypse is also a crisis of empathy. I mean, especially a lot of the kind of spreading of COVID pandemic was just a result of people being like, well, I'm okay, I'm fine, so I'll go fly on a vacation somewhere tropical and bring my variant somewhere fun. So I feel like maybe, I don't know if a small community of care is enough to overturn an apocalypse, but in the case of the novel where a minor apocalypse does indeed occur, I do think that that kind of social glue and cohesion does offer at least a buffer from how terrible life is.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's not the Walking Dead nihilism in this book at all. Like it is, which gave me stomach aches, and I had to stop watching it.
Yeah.
I have a question for Leah. Adrian, the character of Adrian was so realistically frustrating. I won't spoil why. How did it feel to put Sophie through the emotional ringer? Did you know before you started writing it, like, did you have it in your head she would be strong enough to withstand his behavior when you set out to write the novel, or when you set out to write that part? Or did you discover her strength while she was discovering her strength?
It's a little bit of both. I had known, because I'm not one of those writers who let their characters go wild and do whatever they. I mean, I do it because you need to finish a novel, but I tend to be controlling and I want to know what's gonna happen. I knew what Adrian was up to, but I wasn't entirely sure. Like, Sophia brought me to places about how she'll react to it, and so I knew that I was leaning on Sophia being a good person and seeing strength in other people and believing in the best in others. And she trusted Adrian, and at the same time she also leaned on him, being, because he's the only person who's very supportive, seemingly supportive of what she does for a living. So I think I can relate, and I felt very sad for what she went through, even of course I created it. But at the same time also, I think the way that Sophia reacted to it afterwards, those are things that that's when I learned not to plan and not to decide for your characters, like that is the part where I hit a writing block. Like, as a writer, I don't know how to, I don't know how to jump to the ending now. And then Sophia was, wanting to find ways to make things okay, and however made that look like. And that was very exciting and kind of scary too for me as a writer. I don't like losing control, but at the same time, it's good because I have made Sophia to be this person who want things to work out, or want, even though it may not be what she envisioned at the beginning. Yeah.
Like a good hairstylist would. Wants things to work out. And sometimes I can't imagine what it would feel like to shave someone's head and find out they have a bumpy head or something. Like, what do you do?
Oh, I know.
Rena, sorry, I have to scroll up, had I went too far, mentioned that you look like an avatar right now and whether you're using a filter.
Me? Oh, no,
Yeah.
no. My husband set up a very professional theater light, and it's, I feel like I'm in a football field. That's like what it is.
Well, you look beautiful. And your editor, Anne, says the hairstyling competition is an excellent finale or build up celebration in the book.
Oh yeah, I love silly competitions. I mean, I guess it's not silly in the context of the novel, but I like contests where, like, okay, let's do this, and whoever wins will win this. Like, when I was a kid at school, I had this incident when I was with a friend. We were sitting at the back and we're trying to write notes. And after we write our notes, we're supposed to sit down, but we decided we're gonna stand up even after the teacher starts speaking. And we decided we're not gonna sit down and we're gonna wait this out. And there's really nothing, we were not playing for a prize. We're not, there's no stake, but we just decided that, it would really be great if I end up being the last person standing. And I won that competition, but that's that small thing stuck in my mind. Like, I like there to be that kind of competition where something big is at stake, but at the same time it feels kind of silly in a way. Like it, people were sort of like trying to see it as something playful, but at the same time, like, obviously for the people in the competition, they know that this is much more than entertainment, right?
Yeah, it's a good dramatic irony where we and some of the characters know the stakes, but the audience of the competition doesn't. Yeah, it's
fun, right? It's like,
yeah.
okay.
I will say you'd probably like the television show that I've gotten obsessed with since the Blue Jays stopped playing baseball this year, Taskmaster. It's a whole bunch of comedians who have to do silly tasks, and they're playing for like pride and like, yeah, I think you'd like it. I watched 4 episodes today, so. And there's one more question from Thea, Andy, and this will be the last question for the evening, and then I'll do some closing remarks. Speaking of work, Andy, I'd love to hear more about your characters as surveyors, capturing images for gentrification, scrubbing them, etc. Such a rich metaphor. Can you talk a bit about that choice of work for them? She says, sorry, the question is difficult to formulate. I also had a question whether there is a company that does that work besides Google, but do Thea's.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's obviously a fantastic question. So thank you for that. The work they have, essentially, Anna drives a sort of surveillance van that goes around and essentially just takes panoramic shots of potential development sites. And Wynn, her colleague and friend, her job is to kind of go through the photos and remove anything that could be compromising. So people's faces, license plates, she blurs them out. So Anna basically goes out, takes the pictures, they're kind of downloaded into a Dropbox. Wynn accesses them and anonymizes everything in the photos. And this is, they found their way to these jobs very differently. Anna actually likes this job. Anna has had some kind of awful stuff in her past, and she's found this job as a way of being like as distracted as possible. She refuses to use the GPS in the van. She does it all by like muscle memory and road maps. Wynn, however, is just like a broke arts student who's has Photoshop skills. She's found this job. I think that the idea of it being a choice of work is kind of the funny thing, is that these characters are, like many of my friends, people who don't really have much of a choice because they're precariously employed and are working freelance or part-time or on kind of short-term contracts, doing things that are in many cases morally repugnant because they need the money, especially because rent in Vancouver is quite high, and the dominant industries here are marketing and tech. And if you aren't down with that, you'll have a hard time, making ends meet. So I myself and many people I know have had to kind of, go over to the dark side for a bit and work these jobs that might actually be, actively destroying the parts of the city that you like. You might be writing ad copy for a condo development that is going to replace the lovely kind of mom and pop clothing store that you've been going to for 10 years. You might be writing ad copy for events that firsthand are completely parasitic and kind of ruin the locations that host them. But of course, you have very limited choice as to whether you take these gigs or not. So Anna and Wynn are kind of strong-armed in a sense into these jobs that, especially for Wynn, are sort of, they increasingly realize that they're kind of becoming part of the opposition here. They're sort of playing out this role that isn't really necessarily in their best interest. As far as the kind of metaphorical thing, the novel is quite interested in surveillance, but also in this notion of reformatting. So, what do you do when you've colonized the entirety of a continent, you've eradicated all the indigenous cultures, and you had this sort of last chunk in the West Coast? What can you do but kind of reformat it over and over and over again to kind of keep on reusing the same chunks of land, to take a thing that was forest, turn it into a field, turn it into a parking lot, turn it into an industrial warehouse. When the industry dies, turn it into condos. This kind of continual recycling of the land, taking it further and further away from its origin and imbricating it in like worse and worse systems of exploitation, and resource extraction, all this stuff. So the idea of, the landscape being scrubbed of identifying features and kind of rendered into something that will work, that can be sold, is something that both the characters kind of eventually clock to, because they've been sent to the small island for the express purpose of preparing it for the kind of next wave of development, which will turn it into yet another kind of anonymous, homogenous hellscape, more or less.
It's interesting how we use land. Like the most extreme version I've noticed is when I went to visit family in London, England, and we took a trip to Paris. It was startling how differently Paris and London look. Because London it's beautiful, but it's all the same type of beauty. And like it's all built to a certain look, which I found at times overbearing. Whereas London, because it had the Blitz and it had a more build it up, tear it down mentality for a lot of the stuff. Edmonton inherited that mentality for sure. But you turn a corner and there'd be a completely different architectural style or a completely different use of the land and reuse and reuse and reuse. Yeah, it's interesting how that bleeds out to the edge of BC. Like, yeah, like that idea of how are we going to paint this over? We're going to make this monolithic. Are we going to tear it down and rebuild it in a different tear it down? Yeah. Sorry, giving me a lot to think about this late in the evening, Andy.
That fetishizes the previous one, right? The kind of like country home fetishizes the landscape, the suburbs fetishize the country home, and then when it becomes a kind of big box store or say a manufacturing plant, and that closes and it's just turned into cool urban lofts, that fetishizes dead industry. It's just this continual kind of snake going further and further into the past.
Or watching, like, Edmonton recently they have a distillery, but they built a distillery district around it, which to mimic the one in Toronto, but then it's all big box stores. Like, and that's not what the one in Toronto is. Which, if you want to know what it looks like, the opening scene from X-Men 1 was filmed in the distillery district. But yeah, that's the last movie reference I'll make tonight. We'll see. Okay, it's been a great evening, everyone. I want to extend a thanks to Raphael from Massy Books, to our authors, Leah and Andy, to the book editors, Ann Nothoff, who edited Sinistar Salon and who was participating in the chat, and to Doug Barber, who edited Last Tide and who we miss very, very much. To the book designer, Kate Hargreaves, who made both covers, like who designed both these books. Great work. Like, I don't know how you do it. And to link sharer extraordinaire, Carolina. And of course, thank you all for being here, wherever here is for you. It's been a really perfect evening. I appreciate you going on this journey with us. I will say we have one more launch coming up for the fall 2021 season, and that's of the new landmark edition of Thomas Wharton's novel Icefields. And that'll be hosted by Suzette Mayer next Tuesday, October 26th, an hour earlier than this one started tonight. So 7 p.m. Edmonton time, as I call it. Information about the event is on our website. That's newwestpress.com, 1W. All our books are there, and future events will be posted there too. The links to the Massy Books store stock is in the chat, right? Not quite near the bottom. Everyone's saying really nice messages. You guys should scroll through that. But other ways to keep in the know for events and for what we're publishing is to sign up for our newsletter. You can do that at our website as well, or you can follow us in social media. Carolina has put links and handles in the chat box. Thanks again, everyone. As I always say at the end of events, remember, if you can, please continue to support small publishers and bookstores of any size. We wouldn't be here without you all. Good night.